Hi there, my name is Eric Reynolds, Associate Publisher at Fantagraphics Books, and it's my pleasure to welcome Matthew Southworth and Garth Stein, the co-creators of the Cloven, Book 1, which Fantagraphics is publishing this summer, just as Comic-Con is happening right now. Anyways, I want to thank you guys for coming. Matt, you want to talk, just say hello, just so we can differentiate who's who?
Sure. This is the sound of my voice, as they say on Dana Gould's podcast.
And the other fellow is Garth Stein.
I'm Garth, and the background behind me, you will see an image from the Cloven Book 1. So I hope it intrigues you and just doesn't depress you.
It's a pleasure to talk to you guys. Always enjoy talking to both of you. I wanted to start with a question, something that Matt brought up last week in conversation, which was that we live in Seattle right now, where there's a lot of stuff going on, both locally and as part of a larger national movement. And you guys have done a book that's really meant to evoke Seattle, what it means to live in Seattle right now. And with all of these changes going on, particularly, on Capitol Hill, how are you going to be able to navigate that in future books, or do you even try? Sorry to dive in with such a pointed question, but we're living, we're literally at this time when we're recording this, we really are living through a rather remarkable moment in our town. And one of my favorite things about the Cloven is that it is a wonderful kind of ambassador for Seattle for warts and all. It really does resonate as being representative of what's going on, in the city right now in terms of, this kind of civic crisis with homelessness. And so anyways, Garth, how do you address that as you're still writing the series, but have already written a third of it?
Yeah, I mean, well, we're adapting on the fly. I mean, because while it's easy enough to take a story like we have and kind of fairy tale-ize it and to make it out of time so that you could drop in a mask here and there and it wouldn't be like necessarily woven into the plot.
Right.
I think that we're trying to react to what's going on without kind of overreacting, because we are doing longer form story. It's not coming out next month, it's coming out next year. Mm-hmm. And so we need to sort of kind of anticipate what it's going to look like. And Matt and I have had several creative discussions about how are we going to represent this so that it is, what do we see the future is going to be in Seattle? And then how are we going to portray it while still maintaining true to the core, the arc of our character, who really is the driving force of the story.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I ask is because I think there is a lot of, like I said, really timely resonance in the book. And perhaps this was a bad question to lead with, because I don't want it to imply that it's a book about Seattle, the city of Seattle. It's not. It's a much bigger tale, but that's just kind of like an extra place to enjoy.
Absolutely. And we wanted to put Seattle in it very deliberately. When I wrote the script, I wanted it to be in it. And then Matt and I, in all of our talks, and Matt will address this, I don't want to talk for Matt, but we placed it in Seattle. There are very, very, very recognizable landmarks that you will see in the artwork that you can't say, oh, we shot this in Vancouver. It just doesn't work for the Cloven. We shot it in Seattle. And so we do have to react to that, but we also want to bring in these global issues, the issues of our, the homeless problem that we have in Seattle, all sorts, homeless teens, especially, but also the biotech world and biohacking and all this sort of stuff, which is really very relevant to the virus that we've now has come to dominate 2020. So we are, interestingly, right on that. And I think that we can push forward because I think we are excellent seers and prophets, and we will be able to know what's going to happen, and we will share it with you in the Cloven Book 2 in the summer of 2021.
That's right.
Well,
I think the pandemic, I mean, can't literally almost can't not affect the way that you approach the story, whether you literally include it in the story or not. I know, Matt, talking to you a little bit over the last few months, like the pandemic has deeply affected just how you work and how you kind of go through the day, and it's bound to infuse itself in the work as well.
Yeah.
Have you seen it since you've been working on the second book?
Well, it has definitely affected, the way I work, or to be more accurate, the way I don't work. As I've said to you before, I tend to procrastinate, and I'm deeply distractible. And that's when everything's going great and I'm paying the bills and, feeling healthy and not afraid I might die if I pick up the wrong watermelon at the grocery store or wander into the streets of the occupied zone. So it's been just on a productivity level, it's been a strange thing to deal with. But, textually and texturally also, it's had an interesting effect. Like book 2 opens in the offices of The Stranger, which for people who don't know is our local free news weekly, which since we started working on this, The Stranger stopped publishing a print edition. So that's a big change. And they're moving off of Capitol Hill down to the International District. I found that out just as I got started. And at the moment, their offices are right smack in the middle of the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone.
Yeah.
So all those things are real concrete effects, in that, like, I need photo reference of the offices, which I wouldn't be able to get if we were doing it set right now where they currently are, and I really can't do because they're not in those new offices yet. So I guess it's basically a sort of a long way of saying that, like, it's an interesting experience because we're not doing issues of a book that comes out in 20-page increments every month, and we're 3 months ahead of our publication date or whatever. So in some ways, the productivity breakdown that's been caused by the virus and everything else has sort of benefited us, because it's meant, like, whoa, slow down, everything's about to change. Don't draw it wrong because it's going to be different in a month, or 3 months or whatever. But of course, you could spend your whole life waiting for the right time to get something done too.
Yeah,
so
that's a double-edged sword there, Matt.
Exactly. It's and that's kind of what I do every morning. I wake up and I go, okay, accomplish something or wait for the right time. That's sort of my toothbrushing mantra.
I think that I know that we're moving ahead in the areas that we can move into while we're still digesting the present. But for sure, it's definitely something we're thinking about, and we want to reflect as contemporarily as we can in a long form, hardcover book format,
Yeah, I think it's important too, for people that haven't seen the book yet, or for people that don't know like the work that I was doing on Stumptown. It's been important to me to, when I do something that's set in a real place, to make it feel as real and as, to use Garth's metaphor, as shot on location as possible. So, so when they're, in a homeless encampment under the freeway, hopefully you can recognize roughly where that part of the freeway is if you live here. Or if they're running through a park and it says whatever, Carkeek Park, you go, oh, well, that actually does look like Carkeek Park. So given what's going on right now, and that the character of Seattle may be changing vastly. Maybe not, but it might be. It's an interesting experience to try and document that on the fly.
Yeah, right. It will, and there are so many moments in the book that anyone who lives here would instantly recognize. Where's that convenience store that Tuck goes in and with the guy?
That
With
I
the
don't
weird-
I don't think that
You-
one. Yeah, that one I think I just found that as a reference.
Yeah, it was. I remember that. The you know, it's set in Fall City, and but we. He's like, what does this store look like, and is it part of, you know, we had to discuss this. Is part of what we discussed, because I throw down on a piece of paper, you know, a mini mart in the middle of nowhere, and that's like, how in the middle of nowhere, and what do you mean in the middle of nowhere? Is it on a strip mall, or is it in part of a larger thing, or is it really a stand, you know, is it a 7-Eleven and there's a Baskin and Robbins next to it? All these questions have to suddenly be answered by, you know, Matt's probing me, you know, and then I say, well, no, it's a standalone. So then he went and found like an image. He said, does it look something like this? And I was like, yeah, I think it looks like that.
Yeah, it looks like, I mean, it looks like it could be any roadside, you know, gas station, convenience store.
But there's a brilliant frame in that sequence, in the convenience store sequence, where, you know, Tuck is outed to our you know, we're talking about, by the way, the main character is a genetically modified human organism. So he's half man and half goat, essentially. So he's got goat hoofs and lower legs, and he's got the digestive tract of a goat, but otherwise he's human. And he's outed, you know, trying to sneak by wearing hip waders in this convenience store. And a guy pulls a shotgun on him and says, let me see your hoofs. I mean, it's the weirdest thing. And to make it, I mean, Matt like art directed the crap out of this thing. And it was amazing because there's like this, you've got this poor little like goat guy, like humiliated, stripped down, you know, exposed. And then over his head in the back wall, there's like an antelope deer, you know, mounted head with big horns coming out. And there's just something so quirky and genuine about it. It's like it really, I think what I love about, you know, being able to work with Matt is that I feel like anything I say, it goes through into this amplifier, and he figures out a way to sort of visualize it that makes it like 3 times what I was trying to say, you know, and it's really kind of cool to see that come to life.
Well, I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit, because the reason I brought up the convenience stores, because I think Matt mentioned like shooting on location, or, you know, making some analogy to that. And the book is fantastic in that way. And there's even a scene later on in the book, I think, where, well, I won't spoil it, but there you see that convenience store again later in the book, when the guy in the semi truck comes that is being followed by the doctor. But you mentioned, just what you just said touches on this as well. And that's what I wonder if, let's talk about your guys' relationship, because I wondered today as I was thinking about this panel, if your mutual background in theater and film, each of you, hasn't sort of served as maybe some common ground when talking about the vocabulary of comics and visual storytelling. If you guys don't have some points of reference there, even though, you know, Garth, you're primarily known as a writer, and Matt, you've primarily, you know, illustrated other people's books or other people's writing.
Right.
But yet you guys seem to have a real synergy that, you know, just seems to work really well.
Yeah, I think, you know, the first conversation that Garth and I had, you know, to set the scene a little bit to people that don't know this story, obviously, Eric, you contacted me. You said, hey, there's this guy, Garth Stein, who's interested in doing a project, and you might want to talk to him. And of course, I was like, okay, well, that could be interesting. It could also be terrifying. You know, a novelist who's never made comics before, you know, that way potentially lies madness.
Madonna, all the way.
It could be, yeah. And so I was a little like, all right, well, we'll see how this goes. Let's just see what happens. But the first conversation that we had was at least 2 hours. It might have been 3 hours. And most of that was because we're similarly digressive, if not similarly regressive. We sort of found ourselves going off on the same tangents about this movie or that piece of music, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly, not about comics, really. It wasn't like, oh yeah, it'd be like that cool scene in The Dark Knight, or, you know, oh sure, it's like Watchmen. There was none of that discussion, which was nice because it felt like we were.
You probably get a lot of that already in other collaborations.
Kinda, yeah. But one thing that's been so different about this collaboration is how collaborative it is. It has, you know, normally, at least in my life, my experience, it's like a writer gives you a script and you go off and you draw it. It's, you know, the architect gives you the blueprint and you go build it. And this has been much more like, you know, like we sort of co-architect it, and then we decide, oh, maybe we'll move the stairway to this side of the building together. And then we go, what if it had a, you know, a 3-car garage? Yeah, that'd be great. And so it's been much more fun because the story hasn't substantially changed in terms of intent or in terms of how the characters behave or anything like that. But the ways in which we would depict scenes, the ways in which we would play things has definitely been affected by not only our ability to talk so well, but actually to work in the same room on occasion. Like we've done things where I would go down to his office in Georgetown, or he's come up to my place up here in Everett, and, you know, we'll hang out for 4.5 hours and work for an hour and a half of that, and something cool will happen.
You guys, like, you know, I've known you both for a little while now, and it's not often that you have the opportunity to even kind of play a matchmaker like this. And I don't know what it was, but I mean, Matt, I'd known you for longer, and, you know, you and I have had so many good conversations talking comics at the store and everything. I considered you a friend, and
Yeah.
And we've talked about, like, you know, we've even talked about working together at some point, and just the, you know, opportunity hadn't arisen. And so when Garth asked me about a collaborator, you know, about possibly finding a collaborator, it was really like there was Matt Southworth and nobody else. I mean, I really remember kind of struggling to even come up, because I thought, I have no idea. At the time, I think you were working on a James Bond thing or something like that, and I thought you might not even be available.
Right.
And I remember, like, really kind of reaching to the point where I can't even remember who I thought of now. To try to think, like, what, because I think, Garth, I might have sent you like a few links to websites.
You sent me a couple. I can go back in my emails, but there's no,
it was just
there's
like,
no reason to really. It was a mitzvah, you know. I mean,
yeah, it was just, I don't know. I just had a good feeling about it, so I'm glad it's worked out.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the. You know, it's funny. Just people talk about getting lucky and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, you know, luck. What is luck? I mean, it's your hard work. The harder you work, the luckier you get. You know, and so you get, and you find yourselves in opportunities that may not have been present if you hadn't, you know, been trying to do new things and stuff. So I met Eric on the board of the UNESCO Seattle City of Literature project, and we were both serving on that board together. And I'd never met him, he'd never met me, but I was just like, this guy's cool. Everything he says, like, makes great sense. I like this guy. And then years later, he kind of retired from the board, and then I retired from the board, and I was like, yeah, I really want to I think this story is really going to be cool as like a graphic novel. How the heck do I do that? I call Eric. What can I say? You know,
this comic book guy.
And it's like, took Eric to lunch, and I was like, dude, where do you even start? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, this is a disaster. And then as lunch was over, it's like, we're getting ready to go. And he's saying, no, you should talk to this guy, Matt Southworth. I'm going to send you his information. I really think you want to check this guy out. And I was like, done. Look.
So, you know, so Garth, you originally thought about this story, you just assumed you would write as a novel, because that's what you kind of do. And I know at some point you had this, you know, inspiration or revelation or whatever, that you thought it could work as a comic. And what I'm curious about is, how does Matt's, you know, execution differ, or, you know, compare or contrast to how you what you pictured that looking like in your head when you just thought, I've got this novel written, but I think it would be better as comics.
Yeah, I wrote the whole novel and I gave it to Drella, my wife, and she read it and she's like, "No, I'm sorry." And I was like, "Well, first of all, the topic one would consider would be a deviation from my usual story, even though I've written 4 books, only one of them anyone can remember, The Art of Racing in the Rain. And so the only way I could tell another story, but you know, I'd have to have a half mutant, half goat, half dog or something. I don't know. So but I wanted to write this story and I tried it, and she's like, and then she just kind of came out and she's like, "I don't get the anatomy, man. You're describing like this. I know goats, their hoofs, their legs are different. And, you know, you don't describe it so that I can visualize it." And I was like, "Well, how? I don't know how better to describe." I said, "Okay, all right. I'll try." And I was like, "If you saw," I showed her pictures on the internet of some weird dude who makes like muscular skeletal sculptures of Pan and satyrs and stuff like that. I said, "What?" And she's like, "Oh, I see that." And I was like, "So if you see it, you're okay with it, right?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I said, "What if it was like a comic book?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'd buy that." And so then when I was talking to Matt and we were saying, what do we do about this? And what does it really look like? And I showed him, I think, the same muscular thing, you know, this anatomy thing. And finally he's like, "You know, we suggest hoof and then we don't really worry about it, you know." And he gave me all sorts of sample examples. Matt, you can do it now in the comic world of like, you don't ask about, you know, Superman's eyeglasses or Matt.
Right. Well, yeah, there's a famous Grant Morrison quote about, you know, like comics fanboys going, you know, "Who pumps up the Batmobile's tires?" And he's like, "Nobody does. It's a comic book. Just," you know. And that was kind of the approach to the hooves.
Yeah, where does Iron Man when he's on?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, and that's actually the fun thing about drawing comics, something that I wrestle with all the time now, that I didn't know, you know, 10 years ago when I was working on Stumptown, or 12 years ago, whatever that was. You know, you sort of see it in this book. There's a lot of stuff that's fairly realistically rendered, but Tuck himself, I've sort of created this kind of icon for his face. Mm-hmm. It's almost like it's like a letter form kind of, mm-hmm. is the idea, where it's half in shadow, half in light. And I was really curious all along, like, am I going to have to go back and redraw this, or does it scan with the rest of the book? Langner, go ahead.
No, actually, I shouldn't have interrupted you, because I'm glad to hear you bring that up, because I specifically noticed that today when I was rereading it, that Tuck is he is stylized and economized in a way that none of the other characters are, that I'm not quite sure I exactly consciously acknowledged that before I reread it again today.
That's
with
very
that
interesting too. Yeah. I mean, it's like it's a physically impossible nose. You know, it's almost like Batman's ear. It's so sharp. But
you know him, like it, but it's at a glance, you know, like it just reads.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. That was no. That was the idea. Was that that I wanted. You know, Peanuts wouldn't be better if Charlie Brown looked like a real boy. But in this case, it's kind of like you've got a kid who looks like Charlie Brown walking around in a story with a bunch of other kids that look like real kids. Mm-hmm. And I was worried for a while, and then, you know, I just was like, we'll just see what happens. We'll see if it works. It's actually not totally consistent throughout the book. The book opens with a more realistic version of Tuck, and then quickly it starts to degenerate. And I wish I could pretend there was a artistic reason for that, but it's not.
There's a reason for that.
Oh, there is. Okay,
Well, remember
excellent.
the whole first chapter we were dealing with. There's a preset in the first chapter. If you're a clever reader, is going to would notice the condition that Tuck is in the very first chapter of the book, and make note of that, because the reason he is where he is, and the reason he looks like in that first chapter, and more realistically, we had to play up aspects of that I don't want to reveal at this present time I don't want to be a spoiler here, but that's coming back. You'll have that question will be answered in book 2. Don't worry.
Okay, I buy that.
Is the same kind of splintered time in the graphic novel? Was the novel written the same way?
No, it wasn't. The novel was actually entirely from a different character's point of view. Is from the point of view of Jake, who's the reporter in the story. You know, and it was his sort of like discovery and befriending of Tuck and learning the story. So that's the way I had structured the novel. But then when I started to write it, I wanted it to go, but I did have backs and forths and I did have flashbacks and stuff, because that's kind of my writing style, is to not worry about consecutive chapters. And it's easy enough in a novel to place a time, you know, with one sentence, you know exactly when it is. So when I wrote the script, I kind of did it like that, but it was much choppier, like be 5 pages and 2 pages and 8 pages of different times. And, you know, in one of our very early meetings, this is the part of the collaborative nature that Matt and I developed, but, you know, he's like, we can do this, no problem. But here's the thing. And he explained to me, you know, like the history and the tradition of a floppy, and how comics readers tend to be to think in pages of 20 to 30 or 24 pages, chunks. And so I said, well, that gives me a huge amount to work with, because now let me go back and rewrite the script. Don't even read it. And I'm going to put it into between 20 and 30 page chapters. And that will kind of be an issue in a sense. It'd be a natural breaking point if you're reading before you go to bed or something like that, So that's how the time got. And then I said, look, I got a lot of time going back and forth. How are we going to deal with that? And then we started discussing the use of color and how color could influence, a reader's mindset in terms of approaching a new chapter, and whether it's present tense or past tense. And,
grounding them in the place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Huh. Did you dial in, Matt, on that look for Tuck pretty early on when you were just kind of conceptualizing everything?
I don't know if I'd say I dialed in on it, but I was kind of unconsciously circling it, I think, pretty early. I've found over the years I'm not great at drawing on model. Like if I had to draw Donald Duck comics, he would look a little different on every page. And so, I just kept kind of going, well, how am I going to deal with this character? How am I going to make him visually, I don't know the word I'm looking for, identifiable or symbolic. I'm not sure what the word for that would be, abstracted, whatever. So like, even when I was starting at the beginning, I was like, okay, I think he has dark hair, and I'm not going to draw hair. It's going to be a flat black shape, and then that led to, okay, well, what's the shape? And then like, what else could I do with shapes? And then pretty quickly it just started to kind of sharpen. And I always saw him, he's not exactly a teenager through most of the book, but I always kind of imagined him looking like a teenager, sort of
he's got a boyish,
elbowy. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I feel like the style you dialed in on for him too, his story is a mystery, right? And because of that, he's a little bit of a cipher. And I feel like his visuals look very much, is to that end as well. It kind of contributes to his innocence and his, and it makes his increasing lack of innocence maybe a little more clear. Like, it underscores it a little bit.
Right.
So
Right.
It's kind of cool. You know, I just, when you were describing that, Eric, I thought, oh, you know, he kind of is like Harrison Ford in The Fugitive. I mean, he's searching for his history. He's searching for his story.
right.
And he's being pursued and he doesn't know why.
Mhm.
So he doesn't know who he is and he doesn't know why they're chasing him. And so it is a very big process of discovery. That's what the whole story is about. You know, who defines this guy?
Mhm.
Does he get to? Does somebody else? Who gets to define you? Who gets to define a teenager? Who gets to define a young adult? You know, it is about, and that's why I think it works perfect. You know, that's his age. I mean, I think in the book that I wrote that he was 20. So, but you know what? He can look 17. You know, it's a great ability to kind of play with that elasticity, I think, of the every soul that Tuck is. You know, he's in every soul. I won't call him an every man because he's, you know, people say to him always, you know, he's always reminded that he's not a man. Frequently, I mean, throughout the book, it's like, you're not a man, you are a creature, you were made in a laboratory. You don't belong here. That kind of a thing, you know, affects a guy's sensibilities.
Well, and there's something specific to that too that's interesting. You know, how old is Superman? 25 or 35 or 38? It's like, it's really tough to tell. And I think the more specific artists are about drawing, you know, whatever, the beginnings of eye wrinkles or 5 o'clock shadow or whatever, he stops being Superman and he becomes like, oh yeah, that looks like a real guy. So there's something to that abstraction. You know, Scott McCloud in his Understanding Comics book has gone way into this, but this is not quite so theoretically abstract. I think the idea of keeping the character somewhat featureless, the central character, it's important that it's the central character that's somewhat featureless. There's something valuable in that. David Mamet had this thing he used to call the uninflected idea, that when you listen to a fairy tale and it says, you know, a handsome prince is riding a horse and he comes upon a castle, you don't ever go, well, what color is the prince's hair, and what color is the horse, and what's the weather like, and you know, blah blah blah. You don't want to know all that stuff because that gets in the way of the story. You just know prince on a horse comes to a castle. Okay, what happens next? And there's something to drawing a comic in that uninflected idea way, I think, or at least drawing a character in that way. This is why we wind up talking for hours and hours.
I know. I mean, we've gone there
Well,
forever,
I think that's fascinating because that for as much as that makes sense, it's a lot harder to pull off visually, I think, because your idea of a handsome prince is going to be different from somebody else's, but you are still visually communicating with the drawing in a way that is going to make that a more difficult goal.
Right. Well, I think it's a reason that, you know, superheroes don't work very well when artists cast them. And they're like, oh, Bruce Wayne, I see, you know, this artist X, he's drawing him as young Harrison Ford. And you go, oh, yeah, it looks like Harrison Ford. Cool. Yeah, then it's Harrison Ford in a comic book. It's not Batman in a comic book or whatever example you want.
I recently looked at some Star Wars comics that Marvel's published in the last few years, and they have an artist who is almost creepily capable of drawing photorealistic, you know, depictions of all the original actors.
Right.
But it just looks like this bizarre fumetti of, you know, it's stilted. It doesn't work. It just looks creepy to me.
Yeah, it's a cool skill, you know.
It's incredibly technically proficient. Don't get me wrong, but as comics, it just like it doesn't work for me. It somehow like undermines the verisimilitude of it all by being so weirdly specific. Every single panel looks like a still from a film, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, if you look at those Marvel Indiana Jones comics from the 80s, they always suffered from being in this kind of, I don't know if it qualifies as the uncanny valley, but in that in this space between trying to sort of look like that, but the artists were not photorealistic artists. And so instead of looking like a fun comic book about a guy in a hat with a whip, it was like, well, that sort of looks like Harrison Ford, and that kind of looks like Karen Allen.
Okay. We didn't cast Tuck. It's good.
Right, exactly. Although I think he looks like Milo Ventimiglia in your movie.
Well, there you go. Someone get a copy to Milo. Oh wait, I'll do it. No, but I think that the point is that of all this discussion, which is fascinating, but the idea that I think both Matt and I put, the momentum of the story has to carry. Everything is in service to the momentum of the story. Everything is in service to the characters and to the goals of these, and to make a good story that people want to read. And that's why it's interesting that, Matt's told me, usually the traditional method of working with a comic artist and a writer and how they work together. And I was like, well, but here's the thing. When I was writing the story, when I write a story, whenever I write a book, I say the book is not about me. It's not my thing. My ego should not be involved in it at all. I should be in service to telling the best possible story in the best possible way, so that it ascends. And so for me to tell the story of Tuck, the best possible way to tell the story in the best possible way is to work with Matthew Southworth, you see? And so therefore, he and I don't have to worry about, or at least I don't worry about he doesn't have to worry about my ego. I'm never going to come in and say, dude, I draw the line here. He's got to have like curly hair. Never, ever.
Right.
It's like, he will say, what do you think of this look? And I'll say, a little to this maybe, or a little to that. And we work through the things, but we never have gotten to a point where I've had to feel like I am a creator. We are co-creators of this project. He has done these amazing ideas that you're hearing him talk about, the iconographicanization of Tuck. Brilliant.
Well, I think that's a great point, because I think, Fantagraphics primarily publishes books that are written and drawn by one person. And the reason is because it tends to just work better that way as an art form. I think the reason for that is because I think in most cases of collaborative comics, it ends up, it's not a equitable collaboration, frankly. You either have a writer who's, doesn't have the artist with the visual imagination to meet it. It's rare that you really get a good, nice, harmonious collaboration like that. And I feel like you guys are really well suited in that regard, and serious-minded enough to make it work, in ways that kind of brings out the best in both of you.
It's corny, and I feel goofy saying this. I've said it before, but we have never had a disagreement, ever. Like, we've had differences of opinion on things, but they were never contentious in any way. It was always like, if we weren't totally in sync on a thing, if I said, well, what if we did this, whatever it was, I can't even think of one, Garth would go, yeah, let me think about that. Let me try a couple of things. It's never been, no, that's not what I want to do. Yeah. We never had that. And, that's super rare in comics, even on things that when they're, what am I trying to say? Like corporate properties, like things that weren't generated by one of the two guys. I had a really good time working with Greg Rucka on Stumptown, and we didn't have any fights or anything like that. But it was less organic. There was much more of I would do a thing and he would do a thing, and we would try to make them work together. And most of the time they worked. But with Garth, I feel like we're sort of riding in the same car all the time.
That's great.
Yeah.
I got that sense just from working with you guys on it. I mean, because you were adding pages right up until the very end, just to make sure that, all those beats hit in proper rhythm. And
right.
Yeah. And it's great when something like that works out with, we were like literally doing pages, replacing pages. And adding a whole thing. And then like we were like the moving, there was a bubble in contention. And it was like, and I've been like talking to Matt about this bubble for darn it, for like 6 months. I've been like, I think that bubble needs to move. And you'd be like, yeah, okay, maybe the bubble will move. And the bubble never moved. I'm like, Matt, move the bubble. And he's like, he wouldn't move the bubbles. Finally, like I emailed Eric. I'm like, Eric, tell Matt to move the bubble. So Eric says, Matt, move the bubble. And then Matt moved the bubble. And to mess with us, he put it in a place that neither of us thought he was going to do it. He put it somewhere else. And I read it and I was like,
It was
darn that Matthew Southworth is the better position for the bubble.
I don't even remember that. I've repressed the bubble.
That's funny. I totally remember that. It was at the bottom right corner of the page. It was a conversation between a man and a woman. Forget what it was exactly.
Yeah, it was Barry Goff, the third or fourth richest man in the world, depending on what business journal you're reading, and his wife in their estate in Medina.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, I think you guys have done a great job where you're able to meet each other, and bring just
It's fun. It's fun. Listen, this is great. I love doing comics, man. It's like, it's really lonely writing novels. It's horrifying. And at least now I have like, it's not like I go out or anything, but I gotta, like, I don't have to have an excuse to call Matt. I can just call Matt and say, we need to talk. We need to have a creative meeting.
Here's an irony too, is I don't think I've even told you this, Garth. I've started writing a novel.
Nice. Cool.
My first time. So like I couldn't pick something isolating enough to like draw comics. I was like, yeah, now in my free time, I'm gonna isolate even further.
It's the worst.
Have you started drawing, Garth?
Nah, that's just not me, man. That's just no way. My sister is a sculptor, but I can't. I can't. But I'm working on another novel right now. Although again, what's really been a lifesaver for me is the Cloven, just kind of spiritually and professionally, like now. I had to stop. I wrote a draft. I had to rewrite a novel. I wrote it to a draft to a point, and then it was clearly I have to redo it. And then I was thinking all about that, and then the virus hit, and then I kind of got stumbled and so forth. And then the issues with downtown and being taken over, and the protests and all that kind of stuff came in, and I've really been confused about what is appropriate for art now. Does anybody really need another novel by Garth Stein? I think I'd be better spending my energy trying to support other writers who maybe are like really relevant, more relevant than me, a 55-year-old white guy, right? Still, but I want to be doing something, and the Cloven is as relevant as it gets. So I'm like so thrilled that I'm able to like immerse myself in the marketing and getting this out there, and then working on the second book with Matt, which we're drawing right now, and then I'm starting the script of the third book, and I've already been calling Matt and saying, there's a TED Talk you need to watch, and there's this documentary you need to see, and all. So I just love the fact that I get to have this, because I don't know where I'd be without it.
Hey, I'm right. We're probably right both there with you. I mean, as you guys know, this book's coming out in July, and when the pandemic hit and the shelter-at-home orders went into place in mid-March, we had to at least entertain the idea of, do we want to put this out at this time? And I'm really glad we've stayed the course all along the way, because as time has gone on, I really do believe that, in spite of the fact that I appreciate everything you just said, Garth, and I wrestle, myself with just, well, should I be doing something else, right now, than worrying about publishing a book that's going to come out in 4 months. But I really do believe that books are uniquely suited to really help people right now, partly because they're accessible at a time when movie theaters aren't, and concert venues aren't, and people are at home, and they've watched everything on Netflix. They've watched everything in their Hulu queue. And books are just a a road that, you know, you could just, that I think could be really meaningful to people throughout all of this. So I'm really glad we've stayed the course, and more, you know, as the months have gone on and we're in month 3 or 4 now, you know, I'm feeling stronger and stronger that that's going to continue to prove to be the case as we get into the fall, and people are really clamoring for, you know, new ideas and, you know, and entertainment in their lives.
I agree with that. I think, you know, there's something to be said for the fact that we're all, you know, now addicted to social media, which is what? Reading. You're reading all day long. You're scrolling through this thing, reading for information, not watching CNN or Fox News for that matter, or whatever. There's some sort of direct, you know, neural pathway that comes from recognizing, you know, 26 characters arranged in an infinite number of forms to communicate ideas. And, you know, in a weird way, this is sort of connected to the discussion about abstracting comics drawings and so forth. But there's something to the idea that, you know, when you see a movie, 200 people were employed and it cost X millions, X tens of millions of dollars, which meant that corporations were involved and blah, 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 blah. And in this case, it's like 2 people, 3 people made this thing, you know, so we can commit to the idea completely, and any sort of loss of focus in the telling of the story that comes along is purely down to how closely Garth or I can stay stuck to it, which in my case is always a dicey proposition. But I think that there's an intimacy that comes from that when a reader is reading, even if they don't ever think about that, you know, even if they're never thinking how many people made this, there's just something about one person telling you a story, or 2 people telling you a story, as opposed to 200 people telling you something.
Yeah, I agree.
There's the intimacy of a book,
Yeah.
of any book. You know, it's a very intimate prospect, and everybody reads a book, comic book or traditional book or poem, any form of written word. Everyone reads it differently because they have to filter it through their own ideals and values and experiences. And so everybody's going to take something away from it a little bit different. And the brilliance of it is that everybody's right, and that nobody will fight about it either. It's like, you didn't like that book? I loved that book. Right. We do not have to now beat each other up or, you know, shoot each other with tear gas or anything. We just agree to disagree. What a weird concept. But books give us that, and books teach us that too. You know, what's the first thing you do with a little baby infant? You plop the little baby infant in your lap and you crack open a picture book. It's a shared experience, but it's also an individual experience. And that's what's so beautiful about it. That's why I love books. That's why I love reading. And I just love that also now I get to be involved in this, you know, in the idea of it coming to life as a graphic novel. It's like, I still have the book and I open it up and it startles me. You know, you asked earlier, Eric, you know, is this something did I imagine the final product that it has become when I was first thinking, oh, this could be a graphic novel? Absolutely not. I had no idea what I was getting into, except I thought it could probably be pretty cool. That's all.
So what's I'm assuming most of the people watching this are interested in the book, even if they haven't read it yet. So I probably haven't done a great job of describing it, but set us up a little bit for book 2 in terms of, one of the things I love about the first book is that there's just a lot of great set pieces. I mean, Matt used that analogy early on of shooting on location, and I'm not surprised that he thinks like a filmmaker in that way, because there are a lot of great set pieces in this book, both, you know, big outdoor settings to confined spaces. And I know that the arc of the book, I have a loose idea of where the story goes a little bit just from talking to you, but you know, in the first book, the Cloven are talking in the jungle, and
the jungle being the homeless. That's what if you're not from Seattle, the jungle is a homeless encampment with
real jungle.
It's not a real jungle. It's a metaphorical jungle with thousands of homeless people living in it.
You know, but I feel like it's a great Easter egg in that moment when he talks about how there's I think 3 types of Cloven,
Mhm.
the domestics, the urban, and the feral.
And the ferals, yeah.
We don't really see the feral in book 1.
Nah. Yeah.
I'm guessing we do in book 2 or 3.
3 for sure. Yeah, I mean, the quest is for the feral. I mean, in a sense, if you can imagine, like, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein mashed with Planet of the Apes. If you want to like put a hybrid together in the Hollywood style, it's like it's a quest. It's a quest. He's on a quest to find the truth, and then sometimes, do you really want to find the truth? That great moment at the end of Planet of the Apes. So, are we going that direction? No, not entirely. But the idea that there's some place Tuck doesn't know his personal background. He had his mind doctored early on so that he lost a lot of early memories, and then he was basically living in he was raised in a manufactured family by a single mom who was really a scientist studying him. And he finally this all comes together to him in this like realization that he has no idea who he really is and where he really belongs. And so he starts searching after, the herrings. He's going for the red herrings. Do I belong here? Do I belong here? You could be a Dr. Seuss book. Where do I belong? Right. And so he's going to look at every place he possibly can. And of course, the Easter egg of the ferals he's definitely that will be on his agenda. Does he find them? Is that his home? I'm afraid you're going to have to wait.
Even me?
Not you, Eric. I'll tell you.
There are more of those set pieces coming too. There's a super cool one I'm really excited to draw in book 2.
I was just going to ask you, do you have anything you could tease?
There's some good ones. Which one are you excited to draw? Because I know which ones I like, but you go ahead.
Well, I'm excited to draw the one that will be in many ways the easiest to draw, in the snow.
Oh yeah, that's going to be good.
Oh yeah, you get to play with that negative space a little bit.
Yeah, you can relate to that issue of Alpha Flight that made everybody so mad. There's going to be, a sequence that is substantially just emptiness, the way you feel when you're in a really snowy location. And, I have like lazy reasons for looking forward to that. But more than that, I'm just excited because, if we were doing this book for Marvel or DC or whatever, you can't do 16 pages of running around in white space. They'd be like, we're not paying for that, But in this case, since it's ours, it will be as long as it needs to be, which may be 10 pages, maybe 6 pages, maybe 20 pages. Who knows?
I wrote that in the script.
Yeah.
I said, this sequence, I'm not even going to write anything. I said, this is going to be a heavily art directed sequence. There's not going to be any words. And I don't know if it's 4 pages or 8 pages or 12 pages, but we're going to, this is it. This is a big moment. Don't think that because I didn't write anything in this space means that it's not like crucial to the book.
Right. So that's going to be really exciting to draw. And it's funny, like I've kind of already shot that in my head in a lot of ways. In fact, some of it was sort of, again, shot before we finished book 1, before I ever read a script for book 2. We talked about it and I was like, oh, I know exactly what to do. I know what's going to happen. So I've been looking forward to that for a year.
Yeah, there's a great scene at a fictionalized version of the Bohemian Grove. I don't think that gives away too much. That's going to be a fun set piece. There's a scene that I really love. I don't know about Matt. I mean, it may be a little Watchmen-esque, but it takes place in the Smith Tower. I wanted Matt to have a good old piece of architecture to work with.
That's cool.
So there's going to be some fun Seattle locations in book 2. There's going to be a really nice Maserati. There might be a drone or two, and I think that it's a great ending that's going to just really slingshot us to book 3, which is going to, it's going to grapple, it's really going to grapple with some stuff that I think that we, as a society, not just the stuff that's happening in the immediacy of the right now, but, the things that we're dealing with, the choices that we're making as a society in terms of our economy, in terms of healthcare, in terms of, racial relations, of course, but also in terms of scientific integrity and scientific sort of, ethics. And just because something can be done, does that mean it should be done? And there are really a lot of questions about what, who gets to do what to whom. And I think that these, I really want to grapple with those. And I think that by the end of book 3, readers will be satisfied that we may not have all the answers, but we're going to grapple good and hard to get them.
There's a really strong moral center to the book, but it's not in a kind of, corny, typical comic book way. It's done with a real seriousness of purpose, even though it's a very fun and fast-paced story. In a way, I think the book is almost a little deceptive because it has the kind of superficial look at first glance of a more conventional kind of genre piece.
Mm-hmm.
But I just reread the thing today for literally what must be the 15th time. And I keep picking up on some subtext and layers that I missed in previous readings that are atypical for that kind of, for more traditional American genre comic book work. So I'm excited for it to kind of subvert the minds of some people who may pick it up just thinking, oh, this looks cool.
Yeah. I found, that I found that I was thinking of it as sort of a thing about, gay and queer identity for teenagers. And it's not on a textual level about that, but as I was working on it, the more I did it, I was like, oh, this is about feeling isolated and then looking for a community that you can relate to. And that's the thing that is most kind of moving to me about it.
Yeah, and I think it's going to really resonate with the teenage crowd, as well as adults, of course, because there is plenty of stuff in there for everybody. But like Matt's saying, that demographic, teenagers, really are going to resonate with Tuck and his sense of being a carte blanche, but also a need to have meaning, have meaning to his life. And I think high schools might actually, maybe they should think about putting it in their curriculum. I'm just suggesting to all my high school teacher friends out there, love you.
That's a good place. We should probably wrap it up. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm proud to publish the book. It's a wonderful thing. It's coming out literally the same weekend as Comic-Con. I hope people will go check it out. And book 2 will follow up just a year later in time for next year's Comic-Con, which I trust you both will be at in person. So I want to thank you both. Happy to talk to you as always.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
We'll see you sometime in person.
All right. Yeah, hope soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.